Hey y'all, this is Crystal. Thanks so much for stopping by. We're going to be doing a tag today. It is the Sandman Book Tag, created by the one, the only, the BookTube goddess. BookTube goddess has created a very awesome tag for us based off of the Sandman, the comics and the new show. Have you been watching the show? I finally watched episode 3 last night. I've been very slowly watching it, and I'm loving the hell out of it. It's so good. I've also been rereading the comics because I hadn't read them in a long time. The Sandman comics were definitely a big part of my teenage years. I had a friend that was really into them, and so I remember reading, reading them way back then. And we're talking about the 90s here, the 1990s. Of course I wanted to jump in on this tag because the questions are really great. So I'll of course link BookTube Goddess's original video below so you can check it out. But let's get going with these questions. Now they're all themed off of the Endless. So, the characters that are the Endless, of which the Sandman, Dream, Morpheus, whatever you want to call him, is one of. So if you know, you know, kind of thing. But you don't have to really know the Sandman to do this tag. But anyway, so Destiny. What book or character do you think reflects your own life? I had a really long think about this one, and I couldn't really come up with anything. At first I was like, oh my gosh, have I not seen myself in anything? Is there a character who I identify with? kind of thing. So I kind of skipped it for a little while. I was like, I gotta think on that one. I don't know. But I came back to Census by Jessie Ball. I've talked about this book a bunch on the channel. I love this book because as the parent of a child with Down syndrome, this is a love letter to loving someone with Down syndrome. And it's a wonderful, wonderful book. And so really quickly, there is an older man. He's just been recently widowed. His wife has recently passed away, and this world that is in is like, we don't quite ever know really what's going on or what has happened, but the world is different from what it is now. The world is set up in basically kind of like districts almost, and they're labeled A to Z, and so A being like the kind of central, kind of where most people live, and then it kind of just, like I said, it kind of spreads out from there all the way to sort of Zone Z. And so our man that we're following here he's a doctor, but like I said, he is recently wedded, and he and his wife have a child with Down syndrome who is his young man. He's an older kid, but he's still their kid, and so he decides, because there was a kind of a dream that he and his wife had wanted to go on this kind of big road trip to kind of see the country kind of thing, but they never did. Life gets in the way of plans, and so he decides, because like I said, he's recently widowed, and he also has recently discovered that he has cancer and is not going to be living much longer, so he decides to take his son on this road trip. So he signs up to be a census taker as a way of doing that. Now the census in this world is very much like the census of today, where you're kind of knocking on doors and saying who lives here and all that kind of good stuff, but there's also a sort of physical thing that is done to people that's a little bit sinister, but again, none of that is really it's not super duper explained, but it doesn't really matter. The story is really about this man and his son, and the people that they meet along the way, and also reflecting on the past of he and his wife in their early days, and when their son came around, and how their life changed because of it, but how much they love their son, all that good stuff. Is the most connected I have felt, with a parent when reading a story, and I love this book. I love this book, and I wish more people would read it. I don't ever hear anyone talking about it, but it's wonderful, and it's the closest I could come to with kind of seeing my, something that reflects my life, and it's really the parent side of my life that is reflected in here. So yeah, I love that book. Okay, so the next one is Death. I always loved Death. What book has presented death or dying in a way that was unexpected to you? And this one I went with the more sort of reflection of the afterlife. As someone who, okay, I will admit, I am really scared of death. I don't want to die. It doesn't sound fun to me to not exist anymore. I like existing, you know what I mean? But this book, Revival by Stephen King, the ending of this terrifies me. It's terrifying, but I love this book. It's one of my favorite King books, and I just love this book. But the ending is terrifying, and it's kind of, if you know, you know kind of thing, because of course I'm not going to spoil it for you. That's all I'm going to say. I can't say much more. Terrifying. Okay, Dream, of course, is up next. So what book is like a dream or a nightmare? And I went with Neil Gaiman's The Ocean at the End of the Lane. This book is scary to me. It is very frightening because we are getting the perspective of a young child. And so at the very beginning of the book, though, a man has kind of come home, to his hometown area for a funeral. And it's kind of like you do, you kind of go to your old, to your old house, check out the old neighborhood kind of thing. And as he does that, he is sort of flooded with these memories of his young childhood, living in the house, and the neighbor girl next door, and something that occurred at that time, which is so frightening. This is a nightmare. But it also, harkens back to those things, being a child, when things can be really scary. And then usually adults, they don't listen to you, you know what I mean? They don't believe you when you say things. So there's that aspect of it too, which is very much in here. And as a kid, being confronted with something so terrifying, and having a hard time, figuring out what to do about it. I think that is done so beautifully here. I love this book. I love this book so much. It's one of my all-time favorite books, and I love this illustrated version. It's so gorgeous. It's so beautiful. But this is a nightmare. This is a nightmare, but it's a beautiful nightmare. It's so wonderfully written. But yeah, it's terrifying also. Okay. Now we, of course, are with The Prodigal. What is your favorite book about a prodigal character? And I feel like Bernie Sanders, because I am here once again asking you to read the new and improved Romy Futch. So, I love this book, and I want everyone to read this book. But it is definitely has a prodigal character. Romy Futch, he is really a ne'er-do-well, kind of an alcoholic. He's like a taxidermist. It's like sometimes when he's not drunk kind of thing. He's like still in love with his ex-wife. He just can't seem to let it go. He's like middle-aged. His life is just not where he needs to be right now, And like I say, he's still really stuck on his ex-wife. And so he signs up to be for this kind of research project, and goes and does that. So it goes off for, I think, several months, I think it takes, and he comes back, well, new and improved. He's very intelligent now, very, very smart. So he comes back home, and things change for Romy. Will he win his wife back? I don't know. Will he kill the wild boar that's loose in the town? I don't know. Will he I love this book. I always say that it reads like a Coen Brothers movie. So it's zany, it's silly at times, it's really fun, just quirky characters. I love this book. And Romy is definitely a prodigal character. He comes back a changed man, and in turns his town changes around him and thinks differently of him. So it's I love this book. So, Romy Futch for sure. All right, what's next? Desire, of course. So what is the sexiest book you've ever read? And I went with Zenny by Rebecca Weatherspoon. This is a very sexy book, and it is a really fun story too. So right at the beginning, where our character Zenny, is at a funeral, and a family member has passed away. I think it's an aunt, and this aunt has left her left her home and everything in this kind of small town, but she's not really wanting to live in this small town, but okay, she's got to figure some things out, right? And so she gets she hooks up with this local guy. I forget his name, but he's a big burly guy. They seem like pretty opposites, but they kind of get together, and it is very sexy. It is very steamy, but also a really great story, and really fun characters. I love having the male in the story not being this like super hot hunky guy. He's kind of, like I said, this kind of just big guy. He's not like fat necessarily, but which is nothing wrong with that. But I'm just saying he's not like supermodel guy like a lot of in romance. He's just kind of a normal guy with like a beard and everything. Anyway, I think he has a beard. But anyway, so I love that book. Yeah. Okay, despair, of course, because there has to be some despair. What is the most depressing book you've ever read? And I've read some very sad books. But I'm going to go with Betty by Tiffany McDaniel for this one, because this has just so much sadness throughout it. It's very depressing, and it can be really hard to read at times. But it's also just really wonderful, you know what I mean? So in it, we're following Betty, and we meet her at first. She's a young girl, and we kind of follow her as she, becomes kind of a young adult. And this is basically her family saga. Her mother and dad meet, and they're just dirt poor in like kind of Appalachian Ohio. There's so much going on. There's sexual assault. There's all kinds of stuff in here. Is what I'm saying. So look up any kind of content warnings that you may need. But it's very sad because things just never seem to go right for this family. Like I said, they are dirt poor. They don't always have food. They're just struggling. There's some mental health issues, absolutely, because of generational trauma. It's bad. It's very depressing and sad to read, but I would recommend it because it's really it's lovely written, wonderfully written. It's a beautiful language in here. Tiffany is just a really wonderful writer. But just brace your heart for it. Know that you'll be crying, so have some tissues nearby. But yeah, this is definitely one of the saddest, most depressing books I've ever read. Okay, Delirium. What is the most absurd or nonsensical book you've ever read? And I went with Book of the Damned here by D.A. Fowler. I've talked about this one before, but I always say this book is just bonkers banana pants. It's so good. It's so fun. So this is a horror novel. We're following basically what happens when people read this book called Book of the Damned. They check it out from the library, and it turns them into like killers, but they're transported also into into the story that's in the Book of the Damned. Kind of like I said, they're transported into it, and so they're living out the things that are happening in Book of the Damned, which is where the bonkers stuff comes in. There's like I can't even say that almost, but it is crazy. It is crazy town. It's so much fun, and it is just bananas. I love it. I loved it so much. It was so much fun, and it made me laugh because it's so crazy. But I just enjoyed the hell out of it. So it's definitely one of the most kind of like absurd things I've ever read. I've ever read. So yeah, I gotta go Book of the Damned for that one. Okay, that's it. That's the tag. So yeah, nice, kind of short and sweet. So, of course, if you're a Sandman fan, you're tagged. I'm looking at you, MJ, over at Reading This Life. I'm going to tag you, and I think I'd like to tag M's book next. I would be very interested in your answers for some of these, especially the first few. I feel like you probably have some good some good answers for that. And of course, tag your it. If you like the sound of this tag, go ahead and do it. I would love to know. And thanks to BookTube Goddess for putting it together. It's a great tag. Really super interesting, thought-provoking questions. So yes, very good. And that's it today for me. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate your time. Till next time, friends.